Companies looking to double their revenue, should they focus on hiring a VP of sales first or build out the sales team first? I mean, is it chicken or the egg? What are the pros and cons of each of those strategies?
If you have a strong leader in an organization, could be the owner, could be someone else that's taking it on. But salespeople need guidance. They need to constantly be understanding what the priorities are. So I think the very first thing to say is without leadership, you're really asking for the Wild West. So in my opinion, it starts with leadership before you build the sales force.
Okay, excellent. John, what about you? I know I've come into a lot of companies where no one's handling the marketing, right?
If there is no one that's running marketing like a CMO, the owner is the CMO. That is the case. And they have to decide at what time do they want someone to come in and partner with sales to drive top line revenue, to drive leads, to drive brand, all those kind of things. And if they start seeing that they just don't have the time or the capabilities, their competitors are running ahead of them, they want to go in a different direction, they want to bring innovation, then they're going to have to look outside and bring in somebody to be their chief marketing officer.
So we were talking earlier, you mentioned about salespeople are the brand ambassadors, right? So when you came up with the new messaging and the new brand strategy and marketing strategy and all that, how did you roll that out to the sales team? And were there any objections? I know you mentioned some were not culture fits and things like that, but what is the process of rolling that rebrand out, so to speak, to the sales team?
Go ahead, Mark. You can take that one.
No, you go first. You give your angle on it because I'd like to hear it.
Sure. It really wasn't that difficult because we were involving people all throughout this process. There was no abracadabra moment. This was something that we had involved so many people in. They knew what we were doing. We involved them in even looking at new logos and ideas and color choices and all those kind of things. So again, no surprises. We also wanted to talk to customers about this, getting their input on things. So, as much as I would like to say this was some voila, it really wasn't. The sales team was very much behind it. The thing that I think kind of piggybacking on something that Mark had said is when he was talking about the Sales Training Academy, and I'll just put a plug in for the graphic designers that are out there, is that everything in the B2B world, we still think digital. That was one of your first comments. But I have found that the power resides in printed work still today. To be able to sit across the table from a customer and in many times just a one-page graphic to tell a story that a customer can use that as a discussion topic, as a point to make reference to, and have something that's printable really has huge power today, way beyond what you would imagine. And so, yes, customers do spend a lot of time online. I have found that the decision makers spend no time online. They have no interest in hanging around the internet and doing research. They'll have someone do that for them. Right. Then they'll bring in a salesperson, and that's when the salesperson has to be able to be true to that brand that they saw online.
Excellent.
Yeah, that was exactly correct. I'll give you two little insider things that we did in addition to build the support from the sales team. First of all, it was during the process that John's team was building the marketing, the sales leadership team was working with each individual salesperson, and we were aligning where they wanted to go. And we were trying to connect their personal goals and ambitions to the growth trajectory that the company was getting. Because you can imagine most salespeople want to grow. They want to make more money. Sure. It's a good thing for them to be that way, but they don't always make the connection between how these changes that the company is making is going to help them do that. So we would start in conversations behind the scenes to get them to support the moves that we're making. The second thing that we did was marketing was invited to our Friday sales calls. So every Friday we have a sales meeting, and there was an absence without their presence. It was like there was something missing. And so John deployed people on his team to start showing up and start to talk about the tools that they were building and those printed materials that we were getting. We were engaging in conversation, collaboration. So it wasn't me as the sales leader telling everybody what they should do. I was facilitating and pulling out, hey, Rich, you did this. Tell us about how that worked, why that worked. And he would then share it with the sales team. So we were looking at the salespeople that were early adapters to these things, using them as bright spots. And we leveraged that to get them to cascade the information. So while everything John said was exactly the way it worked, but behind the scenes, those things we're also doing to complement the effort.
I love that. That's great. So, well, I want to get on to some other questions with you guys, but just to kind of recap this. So how long did it take to go from, as you mentioned, the 18 million to 50 million? Like, what was the span of that?
About 6 years.
6 years. Okay.
6 years with a pretty consistent year-over-year growth, including going through COVID. Obviously in COVID there was a dip, but when we came through COVID, we kind of got back on track. But it was about 6 years.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, it was stair-stepped. So it was not like a hockey stick growth. It was designed deliberately because remember, we had to grow operational capacity to handle what we were selling. That means hiring crews, getting foremen, supervisors. There was a lot of complexities to grow a company over 6 years to double in size.
Double its size. Yeah. Yeah. Controlled growth. I love that. So now I have a question for you, Mark. We're going to shift a little bit away from the case story here, but in your experience, you started as kind of like a VP of sales into a fractional role. And for companies looking to double their revenue, should they focus on hiring a VP of sales first or build out the sales team first? I mean, is it chicken or the egg? What are the pros and cons of each of those strategies?
Yeah. I think that there are situations where both could be, if there's a strong leader, okay. So let's talk about the need for leadership. Okay. So forget about whether or not it's a full-time or a fractional person that's doing it. If you have a strong leader in an organization, could be the owner, could be someone else that's taking it on. But salespeople need guidance. They need to constantly be understanding what the priorities are, the priority initiatives that we're doing. And there's a lot of things that have to happen behind the scenes. So I think the very first thing to say is without leadership, you're really asking for the Wild West. Mm-hmm. So in my opinion, it starts with leadership before you build the sales force.
Okay, excellent. John, what about you? I know I've come into a lot of companies where no one's handling the marketing, right? And so you kind of are thrown in there. But for a fractional CMO, what kind of support do you need internally in order to be effective?
Yeah, well, first off, if there is no one that's running marketing like a CMO, the owner is the CMO. Mm-hmm. That is the case. And they have to decide at what time do they want someone to come in and partner with sales to drive top line revenue, to drive leads, to drive brand, all those kind of things. And if they start seeing that they just don't have the time or the capabilities, their competitors are running ahead of them, they want to go in a different direction, they want to bring innovation, then they're going to have to look outside and bring in somebody to be their chief marketing officer. Then the question is this fractional or is this full-time? And candidly, I think a lot of that comes down to budget. If they are growing rapidly and they have a lot of money that they are willing to set aside, I mean, just let's talk about numbers. A good CMO in the B2B space is $250,000 and more, plus some kind of compensation and benefits. Mm-hmm. So if you can step up to $20,000, $30,000 a month on that, plus all of the spend that you have to spend in marketing to drive all of that, that's great. Full-time is obviously better. But for smaller businesses that are incrementally growing, then it makes sense to find someone else that can operate much more on a fractional role.
Wonderful. So, John, I'm going to stick with you with a question. You alluded to it a little bit earlier about the name of the company and right. How you had to work a little bit to kind of not necessarily rebrand it, but to make sure people understood what the name stood for. But what happens when your brand name no longer works for your company? I mean, are there signals of, oh my gosh, we need to fix this?
Sure. I think there's some really strong signals. Like I think about the software company in Chicago called AIDS. Obviously, it was a name that was time to be changed. So a lot of this has to do with, is the name servicing the sales team, or is there something else that we should be focusing on? If your name is narrowly defining you that may be really good in your early days. It makes it easy for the sales team. We are selling widgets. We are Widgets Incorporated. That's terrific. But at some point, you'll start expanding beyond that, and you're going to have to look at different names, different brands. Some are extensible, some aren't. And some have to do with, can I spend enough money to educate my customers to recognize that I'm doing more? So that is an expense standpoint. And many times businesses decide, no, it's time that we just need to change our name. I mean, simple things like Federal Express became FedEx because that's what their customers call them. So there's a lot of things in brand that you are much more expert than me. And I have to say, when we went through this, I brought in branding people like you to help me. So kind of going back to your CMO question, I think it's important that your CMO or fractional CMO, you want to make sure they have a good Rolodex of people like you that they can bring in when they have specialty questions like this.
Right. Yeah, no, I love that answer. And I've had the same thing with clients coming to me and saying, oh, we want to rebrand. And then when you dig a little deeper, well, why do you want to rebrand? And sometimes the answer is just, well, we just want to signal, that we've been in business 15 years and we just want to tighten things up. Or I'm just bored with the brand and let's come up with something new and things like that. And I always say, wait, step back. Because rebranding is a huge endeavor, both in terms of time and commitment and money and all that kind of stuff. And I love what you said. To me, you need to rebrand when it starts to hurt your sales. When the salespeople or when the ownership is finding that, we're not getting opportunities anymore. We're confusing the marketplace. And it's just our brand name is hurting us rather than helping us. And that's the time then maybe you need to look at a rebranding strategy.
And I'll add on to that. I'm sorry. I'll add on to that one thing in that I think many of us, when we start talking about brand, we go to our existing customers for data. That's the wrong people that you want to talk to. They would buy from you no matter what. If you're selling or servicing them at a decent level, you could change your name to anything and it wouldn't make any difference. It's the people that don't know you. And so you have to look at the future and how that name is going to resonate with future people. And as I said, running a Google AdWords campaign, one against the other, is a really good step in the right direction.
I love that. Great point. Yeah.
I think I love the phrase, because you can kind of summarize that little portion of our conversation in that sentence you said. It's time to rebrand when it's hurting sales. That's exactly the whole issue. And the other thing that I would add is, I think that with smaller and mid-sized companies that think that their brand is so established, as John said, that's established with a small grouping of people, but you're going to scale your business and you're dealing with a lot of new people, and it's not from what I've seen, it's just not as well established as you think it is. It's not in the buyer's mind. We're not talking about Apple or Nike. We're talking about small companies that have an impression in very few people's minds. And so with the right twist, they go, oh, that's clever. And it poses new questions like, well, why did you guys change your name? Well, because no one ever knew that we did these services. Oh, I didn't know you did that. So as a sales professional, it opens up dialogue. But I would say that for the business owners out there, if they have a justified reason to change their brand because it is hurting sales, don't get emotional over it, because it probably isn't as big of an impact in terms of the marketplace as you think it is.
Yeah, I love that. No, absolutely great point. So, Mark, I have a question for you. When we've talked in the past, you've kind of used the golf caddy metaphor to describe your role as a coach, but could you share that with the audience? Because I love that analogy of what coaching means or how you view it.
Yeah, well, let's first off take like what it isn't. Okay, so training is about pushing things into people. It's creating new knowledge and new experiences and pushing in. Coaching is about pulling out. So it implies that somebody knows how to in my case, sell or sales lead. So I work with the sales leader, whether it's the entrepreneur, the CEO, or the sales VP, and I work with high performing salespeople as a advisor. I guide them. So what that means is that they have already spent hours and hours and hours on the driving range, hitting balls. They know how to swing the golf club. They aren't looking for someone to come and tell them how to swing. Once in a while, if they're on a different course and they haven't experienced something, yes, they would ask a question. But being a golf caddy essentially means that I'm riding by their side and helping look and see the blind spots that they don't see. It really comes down to decision making and the speed of decision making and the confidence of decision making. So I've got to do this. I'm just not sure which priority I should be doing. What are the trade-offs? And so the metaphor is for those people that golf, sometimes you pull out a 9-iron and you think you can hit it far, but the golf caddy would say to you, listen, there's a lot of wind blowing in your face, and look over, there's water on the right. You intend to be pulling it right. Why don't you pull out a 7-iron? And it's like that conversation is the blind spot that they didn't see. So they were going to grab a club, i.e. making a decision, without having an expert view. And so as a coach and advisor, that's what I do. I don't know if I said that clear, but that's at least it was clear in my head.
No, I like that. I like that. And then I've got a question for John on this was something we were mentioning when we were talking last week was, have you ever worked with a company where they had these great grandiose goals, but they just didn't have the ability or couldn't afford to spend the appropriate budget to support that growth that they wanted? What happens?
And I think to brand in particular, there was a company I worked with years ago called Productivity Point International. And it was in the computer training business back in the day when you did instructor-led training to teach you how to use your mouse. So,
right.
But you know, the fascinating thing about it is that they thought that brand was really terrific and that people just understood what Productivity Point meant. It meant nothing. So we actually had an ad agency work with us. And the first thing they said is, you ought to tell people what you do. So we added a subline that said computer training centers. Okay, that was a step in the right direction. And then they came up with this tagline, which was called "The point is time." And the idea there was, when you're well trained, you actually save time. You're not referring to an instruction manual. You're able to do things without bothering somebody else or the help desk. You're able to really get a lot more done in a day. That's great.
Yeah.
Whole point about the point is time. Our ad agency said, just like Starbucks or just like Nike, you have to be able to spend into that and get people to understand what that all means. It's education. I mean, the word Starbucks, obviously that comes from Moby Dick.
Right.
The relationship to that and coffee, that only comes because Starbucks spent millions, if not billions, to get that through people's heads that it means coffee.
Right.
So that's where I've seen that when a company starts looking too broadly, and we talked about too narrowly earlier, sometimes it's too broadly in the early days, and they don't have the money to spend to it, they would actually be better with a simple name that actually said exactly what they do.
What they do. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that. I like that a lot because, it's one of those things where I like to work with my clients to talk about, I would love the brand to be based on the emotion that you create when they interact with you and things like that. But at a certain point, when you're small and people don't know who you are, you can't do that because you just don't have enough resources to build meaning behind, a brand that doesn't specifically say what you do. So, I like that. So, Mark, I'm going to ask you about your upcoming book. And then, John, I want to ask you a little bit about your Hard Knocks podcast. And, Mark, your new book, Sales Unicorn, Unveiling the 7 Hidden Secrets of Sales Greatness, is in progress, right? But could you give us a little sneak peek about what's the objective of the book and maybe a little gemstone or nugget from what you're putting in there?
Yeah. I think that the world doesn't need another sales instruction book. We've gotten hundreds and hundreds of them. This book is about people that there's this perception that sales unicorns are born, and they're not. They're grown, they're developed. And if you're a sales professional and you're thinking like you don't have all the goods in the world, let's put it in basketball terms. You're not 7 feet tall. You're 5 feet tall. You feel like you're at a disadvantage. Well, that's just because you haven't found the areas of greatness that make you great and how you can leverage it. And so in my sales work, I believe that sales is there to serve a customer. It's a consultative approach. and it's something to give, not to take. And so the fundamentals in the book are really looking at all of the sales professionals that I've worked with, either directly managing or indirectly through coaching and advising. And those are hundreds of them. And I've analyzed them both with data and with quantitative and qualitative input to understand what it is that makes them tick. Why are they great? And it goes beyond sales tactics. Sales tactics are ultimately necessary, but it starts with strategies. And it's a wonderful connection, Sue, between this conversation, which is about branding.
Mm-hmm.
I think salespeople have to declare their brand. Who is it that they are? How do they represent themselves in the buyer's mind? Because no different than we have a perception of the way a company, a customer or prospect thinks about our business, the very same thing applies to what they think about sales professionals. And usually it's what I think is salespeople, not sales professionals, because when they think of it, there's a huge gap. And so I want to provide some guidance. This is a guidebook. It's providing them information that they can make a decision to say, this is who I am. And if I'm focusing on these areas, these 7 areas, then I can actually start to cultivate my own brand and really become known in my industry and reach my own personal goals. And that's kind of what the book's about.
Excellent. John, tell me a little bit about Hard Knocks. Who's the audience? What are you trying to accomplish?
Well, Hard Knocks is just a love project. There's no money behind it. We're doing it just for fun. That's my son and I have collaborated. It's hardknocks.com. That will take you to where all the videos are. And we interview people that have, in many ways, grown into some people that are very well known, people that you would discover and like, wow, these are amazing. And they share their personal stories about the hard knocks and the things that they learned, as we say, at the school of hard knocks, the things that you don't learn at school. It's the wisdom that you get from a mentor. And many of us don't have mentors. And our intention is that by watching these videos, many of the podcasts, by the way, are over 2 hours long.
Wow.
To really get an idea of how these people think, lessons learned, just wonderful, interesting stories. And, the video editing is terrific. And, the idea is this is just an excellent project, but, it's totally for fun. It's just a wonderful opportunity to collaborate with my son and interview some really fun and interesting people.
That's one of the, to me, I'm just getting going in the podcasting world, but that is my favorite part of all of this is talking to some amazing people and hearing their stories.
Yeah.
So I am going to kind of wrap this up and end this with a question that I've been asking all of my guests, is that so that I can honor the organizations that are just killing it when it comes to branding. Is there a business that each of you admires for the work they put into their brand?
And you go first.
So me, just recently, I had a flat tire and I didn't know where to go. And so a friend recommended that I go to Discount Tire. Never been to Discount Tire, had no reason to go there. And from the moment that I called them on the phone to the time that I got in and got out, it was a total of maybe 20 or 30 minutes. And the amazing thing to me is that they did the whole thing for free. Like, oh, punctures to tires, we do those for free. Really? That was amazing.
Yeah.
And, I didn't get bombarded with emails afterwards or whatever, but I left with this really great experience that I've probably told now 20 people and to anyone that's listening to you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, wow, why would you go anywhere else? And in fact, 2 days later, my daughter got a flat tire and I said, oh, by the way, go to a Discount Tire.
Tire.
And she bought 4 new tires. So, they got the benefit of helping me doing something for free and me telling someone else. And that brand promise has come through from the time that I called them on the phone and drove in and to the text messages I got that said, your car is ready in 10 minutes. It was pretty amazing. So I'm a big fan.
Love it. Mark?
Yeah, I'm going to go a different direction, Sue, because that's just the way I roll. I think of Seth Godin, I don't think of and Akimbo and the work that he has done over the years as a marketer, as a business strategist, as an influential person. when I think about the brand that he's built, it's about giving and sharing wisdom. And I frequent that podcast a lot. I read the books, but I find that there's a generosity. And it's kind of similar to what John was just saying about that, something that you get from the brand, like with the tire company. I feel like, man, wow, there's such wonderful wisdom that he could be putting into a book and charging me for it. And he doesn't. He provides it for free. And so I respect people that stand for something.
Mhm.
And I think that they stand for growth around the world. And yes, marketing was the original thing, but I'm a sales guy. I listen to it because I find it the angles that I could take. So I think it's a giving brand. I like Seth Godin
I
or
get his
Godin. I
email.
can't
Yeah.
remember how he pronounces it.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't remember. Godin? I don't remember. But yeah, I get his email every day. So I wake up in the morning, read the email, you get a little drop of wisdom that morning, and you can carry on because it made you think for a second. So
That's it. Yeah.
yeah, I love that. So, all right, Mark and John, thank you so much for spending
Thank
time with
you.
me today and sharing your insights on branding. I totally appreciate how much time you were generously offering me. So, but if people want to work with you or hear more about you and the impact you can deliver, where can they find you guys?
MarkRepkin.com, MarkRepkin.com is where you can find me.
Okay.
Yeah. And mine is venturemarketing.com, which you will see that we are in the midst of rebranding to our original company name, which was Eagle Cross. So when you type in venture marketing, you'll take to the new website. But I'll just leave it at that because my email is jfox@venturemarketing.com. And that will probably be my email for quite some time. So I'll leave that there.
Okay. Well, definitely people reach out to both of them because I'm just in awe of the expertise and the experience that you have in helping clients to grow. So thank you for joining us for this episode of the Turbo Branding Show. I hope you've been inspired to ignite your growth by leveraging your brand. And if you enjoyed this episode, I'd love it if you could help me build the Turbo Branding brand. Please share this episode and be sure to like, subscribe, and possibly even leave a review. And if you or someone you know would be a great guest for this show, an aspiring founder, CEO, or an advisor, please let us know in the comments or connect with us via email. Thank you, and stay tuned for our next episode.